All right. Good morning, everyone. Nice to see all of you. I believe you can hear me if I set this up the right way. I'd like to welcome all of you to our third summit here at the Human Restoration Project, to welcome Sunil Singh for joining us to Humanizing Mathematics. We'll get started here with what we'll be doing here in a minute, but I just want to give you a brief introduction to what this is and what we'll be doing. First off, this event is brought to you by our Patreon supporters. This is how we keep this afloat. It costs some money to operate our platform and things of that nature. So if you enjoy this, visit us on Patreon or visit us on our website at humanrestorationproject.org. That's highly, highly appreciated. And I'd like to remind you that this is an interactive discussion. So if at any point you want to ask a question or get involved, please type into the chat. Or if you'd like to appear on the screen, hit the raise hand button. I'll see that on my end and I can welcome you up to the stage. The goal is that we have an interactive discussion because we're all experts in our fields. We know what we're talking about. It's not just like a formal lecture. Everyone's welcome to participate, and that'd be really cool. So some brief introductions here. My name is Chris McNutt. I'm the founder of Human Restoration Project. Our organization aims at providing progressive resources for free to as many people as possible. And this is one of our many professional development options, where our goal is to have one of these at least once per month. We also have a ton of free resources and research on our website, which again, you can check out at humanrestorationproject.org. And by day, I'm a public school teacher. I teach digital design and media to high schoolers. So I'll turn it over to Sunil here to learn more about him.
Good morning, Chris.
Morning.
Really excited to see where this goes. Going to try to give a Reader's Digest version of a little bit of background about myself. I was a high school math and physics teacher and occasionally English teacher for 19 years. And I left teaching in 2013 for some of the reasons which are aligned with the Human Restoration Project. And those 6 years after, from 2013, were quite formative in terms of everything that sort of happened to me personally, professionally. And you get to sort of view the large landscape of sort of life and education through your own sort of, personal struggles and victories. And a couple books later, and working at Scholab here in Montreal as a math learning specialist, and being active on Twitter and seeing all the interactions that happen on a daily basis, even the micro conversations, it really seems to me that we are moving or need to move towards this thing which is going to be called humanizing mathematics. And what I want to do with you and all the participants is even define what that means. I don't want to even start from a place of we already have a definition. I'd like to see what that even means for each one of us, and see if we can come up with some sort of amalgam roadmap of where to start.
That's a good point. So as I go through kind of going through what the questions might be, if you could do me a favor, if you're in the audience and you would like to define or take a stab at what you think humanizing mathematics is, I'd love to hear your voice. I'll practice some wait time there, some teaching tools. So really quick, these are the questions that we're going to dive into once we get to that point. And you can just kind of read these over. I don't know if I'm going to read every single one, but the question that we'll start off with after we define humanizing mathematics is, what does it mean to have a humanized mathematics curriculum? And how does this differ from the predominant way mathematics is taught? Because in order to say that we need a human-centered math curriculum, or we need to humanize mathematics, that must mean that the current definition or predominant definition is dehumanizing. So we'll start there. And Sunil, if you want to go first, I don't have any raised hands yet. But again, I encourage people to speak out. I want to hear what you have to say.
It's not the lightest topic to start on a Sunday morning, so sure. I think yeah, sure. I'll take a stab at it, and I sort of say that somewhat tongue in cheek. Of course, I've been thinking about this for a long time. I guess we should start from what our current general curriculum is. And, math education is a tiny subset of mathematics. I mean, it's only been around for maybe 100 years or so in a formal sense. And its extract came from mathematics, but it also came from, what the purpose of schools were at that time, post-industrial revolution, 30, 40 years on. So its intentions were, very different from how mathematics has been explored by every person who's ever lived. So, the final distillate, when I say final, I mean where we are in 2019, is that it's really for a performance culture. It's really about measuring proficiency of, for me, very disconnected ideas. Even a simple thing like when we have review every beginning of every school year for every grade to review what you learned, isn't the definition of learning that you haven't forgotten it? I mean, there's some muscle memory. If they're forgetting it, that means either the way that we're teaching it isn't sinking in, or even, the knowledge. And even I think it was Alfred North Whitehead, who's, one of the great mathematicians of the 20th century, said something about inert knowledge, being very dangerous. And it is. So I think what we have to do is first maybe define what our current sort of curriculum is doing and isn't doing, and then maybe just sort of spring from there.
That's a very good point. We talk about this a lot on our podcast a lot, but the concept that it's not necessarily that teachers are intentionally doing something wrong or they're out to hurt students or anything of that nature, but instead the curriculum is focused around efficiency because our goal is to hit a very large number of people in a very short period of time. And efficiency is by its own definition, not very humanizing because people don't operate in that fashion. I actually have a raised hand. We'll test this out and see how it works. I'm going to invite Michael up here. Michael, I believe you can talk and we can hear you.
Morning, Chris. Morning, Sunil.
Good morning. Hello.
Hi, good morning, Michael.
Yeah. So, I think of Jacob's first textbook. And it's actually the only textbook that I even bother using. And it's Mathematics, a Human Endeavor. And as I've evolved, this is year 34, I think, something like that, of teaching fourth and fifth graders mathematics. I think first you've got to acknowledge that our students are human beings. They're not little machines. We're not trying to train them to go to a 19th century factory. We don't even know what they're going to be doing in the future. So it's really helping them love and appreciate and play with mathematics, because that's what mathematicians do. They explore and discover and describe and shape, and most of all, play with it. It's something that mathematics is something that humans do, and we need to be bringing our students into that human endeavor.
That's a great point, Michael. It's a very good point. And as well, it kind of echoes to what Barb and Liliana are saying in chat about this idea of shaping the learning environment to focus on the individual needs of students. And also too, that math can be very fun, which I know, Sunil, that's a big part of, your work is mathematics through play. It's literally basically the title of your book, Math Recess. Could you speak to a little bit about play and math?
Yeah, and I know Michael, he chimed in, and just to sort of link Michael to the book, it was actually in Michael's class where the whole book started. In his fourth grade class with a student, and how that whole day in terms of what was about playing with numbers and playing with math, and the amount of noise and joy that was emanating from a simple numerical problem. So again, I'm going to bring out the word subset, and then I'll retire it. People think, okay, play is maybe some subset of math, or play is a subset of learning, play is a subset of life. In Maslow's hierarchy of needs, I don't know where you would put play. I wouldn't put it necessarily in terms of at the bottom of sort of, physiological needs in terms of survival, but I wouldn't put it too far up. Play is such an essential part of everything in terms of our socialization, of course, how we learn, how children learn. One of the things we do, unfortunately, when kids come into school, especially with mathematics, we wipe the slate clean and we start from scratch. We don't even take what they might know, or their misconceptions or their wonder, And, that's why the idea of play and the first idea of play, which is important, and this is referencing Dr. Peter Gray, and this is the one which even myself, I wasn't terribly good at in my teaching career. But the first element of play is it's self-chosen, self-directed. And that means that kids should be allowed to choose the math problems and ideas that they want to work on. I'm not saying every day in terms of the current infrastructure that we have. At least once a week, there should be a timeout for kids to go, okay, whatever problem, puzzle you've been working on, there's no deadline for it. In fact, you'll end up thinking like a mathematician. And also part of play is that you're free to quit. And we've taken the word quitting to mean such a negative thing in society, but quitting also allows you to do things which make you happy. And I think the idea of play, we're just starting to wrestle with really what it means. For me, it's going to be the last year and a half until I even really dove deeply into the idea of play. So I really think play is a foundation for, opening the door towards a sort of human math education.
Yeah, the whole concept of how do we measure achievement and success through a narrowly defined curriculum, I think that we should spend a lot more time focusing on the fact that our students are bored. I mean, survey after survey, the kids are just not happy in school, especially as they get older and their adolescence. The vast majority of students are not excited to be at school. Which it doesn't have to be that way. There are obviously plenty of classrooms throughout the world who are engaging students through things that they find exciting and interesting and fun, and they don't lose the motivation to learn. That whole concept of, I'm not a math person, and there's a very binary definition of math. I know when I was in high school, I was the quote unquote not a math person, and I did not do well, and I frankly did not like it. I did not like being in math. I failed math 3 times in high school. I was ahead up until that point, so I came back down on track. Do you want to talk a little bit here, and I'll give some people a chance to respond. Again, I encourage you to raise your hand so this isn't awkwardly between me and Sunil the whole time. But Sunil, could you talk a little bit about that concept of being a math person when we have this very narrowly defined curriculum of what math is?
Yeah, this is another prickly pear for me. I love to use analogies, and I'm going to use this one. My favorite sport to watch is soccer. Even though I played hockey, my favorite sport to watch, I'm not a very good soccer player. I can kick the ball around, but I can tell you every single idea aspect in terms of its beauty, its strategy, everything. In terms of, it is the beautiful game, the worldwide game. What does that mean in terms of being good at math? Well, somehow we have this strange, maybe not strange, but that in order to like math, you have to be good at it. And if you're good at it, you like it. That itself is kind of claustrophobic. Like, I've said this in many blogs. I've said it many times. 99.999% of the math I don't know or understand. But what I do understand is how connecting and binding and beautiful and joyful math is. And that's the humanity part in terms of which I'm kind of operating under. So, the idea of, this narrow K-12 band, okay, let's just fast forward the optimum situation of this current curriculum. And let's say everybody got the A's and the perfect papers on standardized tests. They got the gold stars. Let's go to the extreme situation where this, of course, wouldn't happen. What's the end game of that? Like, what is the end game of that? Like, guess what? A lot of these students are still going to leave school not curious about mathematics. They might perform better at their jobs, whatever they're doing. But in terms of the kind of society we want to build, it's not going to build it. And when I say build it, I don't mean like in terms of engineering structures and stuff. I know I'm going to forget this point, so I wanted to bring it up now. Right? We talked about K-12 being good at math. And there's a research article which came out I think last year that talked about when in the 30s and 40s the math curriculum was being constructed in the U.S. education. it had broader goals than STEM. It was actually for a learned society, for this sort of informed citizenry. And we've narrowed it down to STEM goals. And, I'm all for STEM. I'm all for STEAM. I'm also for other letters too, in terms of social emotional learning. But that seems to have gone backwards. Like, we had such a broad sort of initially maybe to love mathematics. So I think just this whole K-12 proficiency standards, it's taking a toll on all of us, and especially I think as educators, teachers in the classroom.
Yeah, and I think that, from a practicality standpoint too, it's up to us to try to brainstorm a way that we can approach these topics, like moving away from a very rigid and narrowly focused standard set to a more humanized system is going to require not only us banding together and talking about these things, but finding a way that we can make this work in the classroom within the current system and then working to change it. Because it's like I have that daydreamer part of me that wants to just say, yeah, we're going to go out and do it. But as soon as I know if I walk into the classroom and say, there's not going to be any standards and we're going to do all this crazy stuff, it's probably not going to end up well for me. And it's probably not going to happen. So is there a way then that we can redefine, moving into the second question here, is there a way that we can redefine what success looks like in mathematics, where we can still at least somewhat pair it to standards, but yet lessen that math anxiety, promote wellness in the classroom, and have a class that is more self-directed, without completely revolutionizing the system from day one, even though that might be the long-term goal?
That's a really good question, and I think it's a very practical question. It's philosophical, but it's very practical. And I'm not saying I have the answer, but one of the things that we can do, and it's the easiest thing we can do. When I graduated from Teachers College, 1992, one of the last exercises we had in our math education class, our math ed class, was we had to list all the qualities of a good teacher in groups and then present it. And I wrote this story in my first book, Pie of Life, because Dave Alexander, our professor, teacher, he just stared out the window the whole time. And I got suspicious of that, as though, why is he not interested in what we're doing? Anyways, after all the presentations, he said, there's only two qualities which make up a good teacher. And he said, honesty and mutual learner. So I'm just going to focus on the honesty one, because we need to be honest with ourselves and with our students. And that's not saying we're dishonest, but I mean really be honest and be vulnerable. So if you have had struggles with math, if you don't know the answer, share that with your students. Disarm the classroom. Like, let them know that you've also, but not struggled in a negative way, but yeah, math has been a kind of a puzzle for me. And that's why, I love teaching it, because it's got all these sort of, locked doors and hidden passageways, and, you stumble and fall. So I wish teachers would be more, I started doing this too late in my teaching career, where in the beginning, I'd only assign when I taught calculus, I'd only assign the questions which I could do. I made sure that I could do them. By the end, what I was doing is assigning all the questions, and sure enough, kids would go, Mr. saying, like, that last question, 17C, questions are broken to A, B, and C, and C were always the tough ones. Could you show us how to do it? I go, you know the drill. So I go, I've looked at it. I'll see how far I can get. And there was like at least 3 or 4 times where I basically could not solve a problem in front of the whole class, with the class. I said, okay, this is as much as I got. Anybody got anything else? Okay, fine. Let's save this. We'll bookmark it next week. Just be damn honest. It's one of the easiest things we do. And once we start to sort of walk on eggshells and things like that, but I think if we be open with our students, especially our elementary students who really, really want to look up to us and trust us, that's a good place to start.
That's a very good point. I want to invite Liana up to the stage here. Hello, Liana. I believe you can.
Hi.
Hey.
Can you
Hi.
hear me?
Yeah, we can.
Hi, Liana.
Hi. I just kind of want to second that last point of doing the problem in front of the class and not knowing the answer, or even if you do know the answer, sometimes maybe pretending that you don't know the answer, as long as it's not too fake. But coming to show the process, that it's not about knowing all the time, being the teacher up front saying, kids assume that you know everything. And then it's frustrating to them when they don't know. I think so important to show the process of figuring it out, coming at things from different angles, taking maybe, choosing an angle to approach the problem, and then partway through discovering that it's wrong, that it doesn't take you where you're trying to go. And to see that process, like when I do a math problem myself, I will sometimes even a problem maybe that's easy for someone else, but I didn't see it and I didn't know how to start it. And my whole page is full of starts, different starts. And I don't like to ever erase any of it because sometimes maybe it comes in useful, but just to have like a whole page of starts of a problem. And then in the end, if you're lucky or the day was good, then you come to the answer of the problem. From all these different ways that you tried. And I think that process, showing that to kids and then letting them try that and having that be what a math class is or a math experience that's kind of what math is. I mean, that's what we do. And maybe that's not taught so much in class.
Yeah. I mean, I'm with you. But being not someone who is a math teacher, I did not really understand what the point of math was outside of finances until I was an adult. So, I mean, I definitely can relate with that point.
Just to let Liana know, I've just jotted down my first note to myself, a collection of starts. That, when you said that, it kind of sent a little shiver up my spine because it really is trying to make the classroom feel like what mathematics is. I mean, this is what it is. Like, if you look back at history, and we haven't talked about that yet, mathematics is really just a collection of starts and some halfway points. And yeah, the people who get to the end, those are the people we hear about. And, those are the kind of the cerebral astronauts who get out there and they land. But for us, it doesn't, that's why this idea of productive struggle, I like the idea, but what that means really is that we will value struggle if you get to the end. How about you just value struggle, period? Like whether you get to the end or not. And I know it's a tough thing for kids to see mathematics as that, but they won't see that if we as teachers and educators don't demonstrate that ourselves. If we don't show our own vulnerability and misconceptions with our students. Those are, I didn't have as many as I wanted. I mean, maybe it takes a lifetime to get to that point. But boy, those are the best moments in my class.
Yeah. I mean, this stuff is such an important concept because I think that there is as Skylar and Nick are talking about in the chat, there is a perceived gatekeeping or real gatekeeping element to mathematics in school because of its very, one route and how it's viewed and how it's seen and what it means to be successful in those classes. And completely honestly, Sunil, I had you on our podcast. I think it was beginning of last year, maybe earlier than that. It was a while ago. And walking into that podcast, you actually changed my mind on this. Originally, I was coming from the boat like, well, we should just transform all math classes to be financial literacy or change them all to be very quote unquote practical skills, daily skills. Because that to me is what I knew math as. But you brought up a very good point, and it builds into our third question here, which is there's a lot of very important concepts of mathematics that build itself into really serious things that we should be focusing on in math class. For example, social justice or how it relates to huge issues in our lives. And I think you also said something about, you can learn about balancing a checkbook in like 2 days. These are not really that hard. However, quantifying research on like voter discrimination, it would take a serious amount of backbone. And I love talking about this kind of stuff. And I think it does relate to how we redefine success when we redefine what it is that we're focused on or the questions that we're solving. So, what can the substantial changes to math look like? Like, what could that look like in the classroom where it could be highly engaging and cool and interesting to learn about?
Well, I think the first thing we have to do is sort of look into our rearview mirror, which is the history of mathematics. And I see you've got there in terms of social justice and, decolonization. That's been a big issue, equity in math and, the whiteness of math education. It's been really a hot topic in social media and in math education circles. And there's been a lot of great people leading this, Rochelle Gutierrez, a whole bunch of people who really, brought this to the forefront. And I'll give you a very simple example, in terms of transforming classrooms. Kids, they need to see themselves or to see, mathematics has been, every civilization culture has explored mathematics richly. And even a simple thing like zero, we treat it with it's such an important number, but we give it such an inert space, like no space. And we don't even acknowledge, we acknowledge authors of certain mathematics, but it's mostly Western mathematicians, like, Newton and calculus, but even that's up for debate in terms of, really in terms of where did calculus start. Going back to zero, I mean, the person who came up with the first axiom and the rules for zero is Brahmagupta, the Indian mathematician. Now, do we not reference Brahmagupta when kids are learning about zero because his name is funny sounding? Like, that's the part of decolonizing it and humanizing it, when we attribute names to people who had such groundbreaking ideas, which maybe not seem groundbreaking because we've trivialized zero in the classroom. What is zero? But, it came from somewhere. So I think going into the roots of mathematics is really important for educators to not only help themselves learn about mathematics, to learn a lot of new mathematics, but you're also going to realize that the trajectory of the Western narrative isn't true. And that where a lot of it came from, most of high school curriculum is 9th century Indo-Vedic mathematics, save calculus and statistics. It's like trigonometry, quadratics, and that came from, that period of time. So I think spending more time and infusing math history, the good, the bad, and the ugly, there's a lot of, and that's what humanizing means. Tell the whole story. I mean, there's some darkness in math in terms of, some of the depression that was had by some famous mathematicians who unfortunately took their lives. There's other, obviously, situations and considerations to take, but storytelling, tell a story. And from there, I think we're going to pick the fruits of, how to proceed forward.
Yeah, I want to turn this over to Liana, who has another point.
Oh, hi. Yeah, I actually had a point about this sort of side conversation going on in the chat, mostly around algebra. And I have noticed a lot hearing other parents. I'm a parent and a homeschooler, as well as I do math workshops for kids. And I hear a lot from parents that algebra, do we need algebra? I don't remember any algebra from high school. So, who knows, who remembers the quadratic formula? I hear that like almost every day. And I think in talking to people, I say, I don't remember the formula either, but you understand certain concepts. Like people, they say, why is algebra important? You use it all the time. You just don't even know that you're using it. People have a very intuitive sense of equality, like an equation, and balancing an equation, and you actually do algebraic manipulations all the time. You just probably don't know how that looks on paper or what the formal rules are, but the concepts are actually there. And I think since we're talking about humanizing, to make the point to relate what you're doing in the classroom when you're teaching the math to what people do already know. To, you know, as kids grow up, they pick up a sense of mathematics from the world around them, and it's just not formalized yet. It's not connected to the language. But to be able to relate what you know to the formal math can maybe bring people in so they can say, oh, I do know algebra. It's not a foreign thing. I actually already think like that. I have those skills. And also, I just want to say, I also love the history of math. Sunil, I think bringing that in to classroom is so wonderful. That's all.
I'm with you. I mean, the concepts that we all are talking about, I think, are incredibly fascinating and also very much relevant. I want to dive into too this concept of PBL. Now, I'm not a math teacher, but I have done a lot of co-teaching with math, and some of the projects that we've done together have been very enlightening to learn more about what math could look like in a very hands-on setting. So, like for example, last year, we built like scale model roller coasters, which is a classic, like it's a classic PBL thing, the marble roller coaster. But it's really interesting to do things like, well, what happens if we put like a GoPro on like a little car instead of on a marble, and then we measure the G-force and figure out, would this be a joyful experience to ride using mathematical formulas? And what we found is that as we're going through projects like this, the teachers don't really understand or sorry, not to say the teachers, the students don't really understand how to apply the mathematics that they were learning until that point. And it might not necessarily be concepts that were on the standards, but it's still useful nevertheless because it was very interesting. So finding ways to use hands-on or at least applicable ideas throughout the classroom. One other example I'll toss out really quick. An English teacher and a math teacher at my school co-taught The Drunkard's Walk, which gets into the history of mathematics and talks about being a math person, and kind of, as we're relating to in chat here, analyze that concept of the hidden curriculum of mathematics or school within a math class. So dissecting what it means to be a quote unquote math person and where that myth comes from by literally talking about it with students as opposed to just trying to fix it from the sidelines.
The idea of PBLs and project-based learning, math lends itself really well to that because it's got applications in so many different fields. And so if we want to talk about application, mathematics is like, it's a heavy hitter. And that's historically always been like, its purpose in terms of school. And that's great because it has applications everywhere, where science, technology, medicine, economics. But it can do more. And there's a book coming out in 2020 by Francis Su called Mathematics for Human Flourishing. And it's based upon his interaction story with his friend Christopher, who's serving time in a medium security prison for armed robbery, who is taught himself and is teaching himself mathematics. And in many speeches, when Francis speaks, he goes, when we think of mathematics, do we think of Christopher? Someone who's incarcerated, who's not going to have a STEM career. What does mathematics mean to him or her if they're in a situation like that? So humanizing means to have mathematics extend the radius of what we would traditionally think people need mathematics for. Going on with Francis Sue's, his view of mathematics is very sort of Aristotelian in terms of the virtues of, beauty, truth, justice, play, and love. I don't see those in curriculum documents. But in, again, 2019, where we are, especially in the state of the world we're in, And, seems like the revolution is nigh, especially with someone as powerful as, Greta Thunberg in terms of climate, what can transpire in a year. I'm very hopeful of what we have to do. And part of it is communicate, is simply talking about math. And I'm just looking around because I'm in my office downstairs and all the book titles. There's one I really, it's always sitting beside me. It's called The Mathematics Devotional. It's a beautiful book. Every page is about one day in a calendar year. It's got a beautiful picture of mathematics and a quote. And the back quote I'll read. It's from Sofia Kovalevskaya, the Russian mathematician. And it's a very simple quote, but she says, "It is impossible to be a mathematician without being a poet in soul," 1895. I mean, that's what mathematics does to us. It transcends us and can transcend anybody, and even someone like Christopher. And that's why I think there's a lot of moving parts here. There's a lot of amazing things happening in education, people writing books, the way we communicate on social media, Human Restoration Project. No one is going to do the heavy lifting by themselves. And this is not going to transpire in my lifetime. I remember I jokingly, I said this in another podcast to my daughter, I go, if I can't change things in math education, pinky promise, will you? Like, that's what I think the timelines are, but I'm okay with that.
And what's cool is that because we now have access, unlike, even 10 years ago, to being able to easily access one another and play off each other virtually, is such a powerful tool. Because if you're looking to collaborate and brainstorm ideas, beyond just asking students and learning from students, there's also a huge collective of educators online who are working to do this kind of stuff. And it's not like it hasn't been done before. There are plenty of educators that are transforming mathematics or any subject area within their classrooms and making it work no matter what setting they're in, whether it be very traditional or an incredibly progressive school. There are ways that we can adapt these ideas and make them work. Sunil, I don't know, before we move into this, like more of like a Q&A or
Sure.
Just answering questions, is there anything else so I know a lot of your writing recently has been on equity in math education.
Yeah.
And I know you briefly hit it, but is there anything else that you would want to add to how teachers can ensure that they have an equitable math class, not just in terms of the curriculum, but also in terms of, the students and how it reflects in the classroom?
Well, one of the things which I'd like to see, and this is sort of touching upon Liliana's point when she said a collection of starts, one of the things which we do, and again, it's all with good intention, especially on social media, Twitter, is that we show the kind of the climax of the story. Here are the 5 strategies to solve the problem. That's great. That is absolutely wonderful, all the multiple representation and solutions. What I'm interested in is the whole journey. It's almost like the hero's journey. When the student first sees a math problem, what's your initial response? Oh, I hate this. Or, okay, I'll try it. Like, document the whole story. Like, that's where I think is important, because then that's what it feels like to be a mathematician. And if that's our goal, and I think it is, maybe we just have to adjust our rudder here. Like, just if we're trying to capture the whole story, I think that's part of it. And maybe that's part of journaling or something that students and teachers can do. But I want everything. I want throw in the kitchen sink everything that you feel about mathematics, the good, the bad, the ugly. I've said that already previously 20 minutes ago, but that's what humanity means, being honest. Like, just give it everything too. And from there, I think the seeds of disruption something will come. But I think going back and cycling back, being honest and just letting students tell their stories about doing mathematics. That's
a really good point. I mean, sometimes the simplest solutions can happen as of tomorrow, like the concept of just redoing an assignment.
Like
the grade does not count right away, or finding ways to purposefully ungrade. and just have conversations, or maybe the journal itself is the documentation that you're looking for. Let me turn this over to Michael. Oh, Michael, welcome back.
You know what? I got so wrapped in what Sunil was talking about with equity. I'm not positive I even remember what the point was I wanted to share. But I think where I was thinking was, the problems have to start with the student. The mathematics has to start with the student. Yes, I do remember what I was going to say now. We don't expect our music students to know how to build the instrument when they start. We don't demand that they only play scales until they have some level of basic proficiency. We don't do that in the visual arts. We don't do that in the humanities. We don't even do that. I mean, some science curricula, unfortunately, do start there. But why is it the mathematics gets relegated to just the basic tools that they were built? Algebra was Al-Khwarizmi's solution to these ridiculously complex Islamic rules of inheritance. And, they would take years to figure out who got what. He made it efficient so that you didn't have to understand all of those complex ratios and proportions. Anybody could solve it. So how algebra becomes a gatekeeper when it's nothing more than a toolbox, that's always been a great puzzle to me. The mathematics of that's been done. It's how you use that in creative ways that is the mathematics. I'll get off my soapbox now.
There's Michael said a word which I had on my notes to make sure I don't think I can get everything in, but he said gatekeeper. There's a film coming out by director Vicky Ablis, who also made the films Raised to Nowhere and Beyond Measure. And it's called Gatekeeper, Math in America. And it's literally talking about really what current math education is doing. It is a gatekeeper, and we have sub-gatekeeping within the curriculum, whether it be algebra later on. I think fractions is a gatekeeper.
Oh, absolutely.
Like we move on from whole numbers, which is the complete fascinating idea of number theory, and is transfixed and mesmerized millions of people and has its own branch in mathematics. And then we move on to fractions and give more time to fractions. To me, that's asinine. Like, it is really, like, I understand, like, a fraction is a number on the number line. And, we need to know some conversion between percentages and decimals and some common fractions and how they apply to practicality. But when we start getting into multiplying, dividing fractions with denominators past 7, 8, or 9, I'm checking out. My daughter's already checked out. And so let's call it for what it is, as we're sort of, getting to the sort of tail end of this sort of discussion. It's gatekeeping. It's bookkeeping. That's what it is. No one's being inspired. No one's leaving the classroom more curious. No one leaves mathematics, generally speaking, more curious. And that's how we should measure what we're doing in our schools. Are kids still curious after they leave your classroom every day? They should be. That's not a tall order.
Yeah, I mean, I think that we have the mindset now, and we're thinking about it in these ideas. And I think that, at least in my experience, the best part of PD is always the questions, the troubleshooting at the end, and figuring out specifics here. Let me see this. Well, the Q&A is kind of works, it kind of doesn't work. So feel free to ask questions in the chat here for anyone that could answer it, because we all have these backgrounds that we could talk about these things. But we've left a pretty substantial amount of time open, like about 15 minutes here, about a quarter of the time, to just answer questions. Briefly, while you're writing those down, I think it's a really important point to note that we can technically measure motivation and curiosity and things of that nature. I'm not saying that it should turn into a standardized thing necessarily, but having students reflect and give feedback on whether or not what you're teaching is interesting to them, or whether they are motivated to learn more math after a certain thing, is great data. And I am the complete opposite of a data guy, but being able to present that information to an administrator or to a coworker, where it's like, yeah, I missed, 20% of the standards, but my students love this class and they're taking a lot more away from it. Chances are, if they understand that content really well and they're motivated to learn that content, when it comes to the brass tacks, which is really sad, but the brass tacks of standardized testing, they'll probably actually do better because they're motivated and they care about the thing that you're talking about, even if they didn't necessarily check all the boxes off on the giant list of standards that may or may not exist. Go ahead.
Chris, you just mentioned standardized testing. So here in Ontario, we have standardized testing in grades 3, 6, and 9 for math. I'm going to pull my daughter's in grade 6, so I'm going to pull her out that day of testing. Not because she can't do the math. I don't want her to think that that's what math is. I don't want her to be poisoned by, okay, that's what the final distillate of math is circling in bubbles and doing these sort of, generally inert questions, and you did well on them. I just don't want her exposed to that. I don't, even if she got perfect 4, whatever that means, don't even get me started on, assessment, because the mathematics assessment is completely, crazy. But yeah, I don't want my kids, and they've already been, from well-intentioned teachers because they have to deliver the curriculum. But both my kids have checked out of math in terms of school math. I used to ask them when they were early on, they were excited to tell me what they were doing. I don't even bother. I ask now just in terms of how their day is, tell me the best part of your day, and it never includes math.
Yeah. So I'm going to take Liana here, and then there's actually a question that we can answer. So Liana, you are on.
Hi.
Hey.
I wanted to go back just a tiny bit to something else that Sunil said about when you pose a problem to the students to find out how they feel about the problem, to start the problem. And I just maybe wanted to emphasize how important that is, and also just take a piece of life experience as well to say that I loved math all growing up. I always loved math, and I had a lot of excellent experiences in classroom and with teachers, but I still lacked a lot of confidence. I was always afraid to speak out in class and to think that I might get the wrong answer, that the right answer was so important. It was important to know. And I had the most fun doing math usually on my own, by myself. And then I went through engineering school, and I got out of engineering school the idea that you can solve any problem. Anyone can solve any problem just if you have enough time and enough resources. It's not always practical for you to solve any problem, but I think that confidence, and then going forward to the rest of my life and combine that with the math, it's something I never got from the math classroom, that, whoa, here's a problem. You can solve this. It's just about, being allowed to make mistakes and to fail and to go through this problem solving process, which seems to be okay for engineers to do or in other departments. I would love to see students come out of a math class feeling confident that they can approach problems and then possibly solve them.
I think that's a really good point, and it relates to that concept, Sunil, that you were talking about with the hero's journey, or about that process. That perhaps part of the way that we humanize mathematics is by placing more emphasis on the reflection and the questions that we ask, as opposed to getting the one correct answer at the end.
I was looking at some of my books, and this one is by Theoni Pappas. And it's called The Magic of Mathematics, Discovering the Spell of Mathematics. I'll just hold it up like that. But for me, if you just look at the title, wouldn't that be like curriculum goals? The Magic of Mathematics, Discovering the Spell of Mathematics for all students. This has already been cataloged and documented. And this is what, Like if you go to a bookstore, like you're going to see all these titles like this about math. Who's buying these books? Like all these people went through our system. So it's almost like they're trying to find, well, where is the light of mathematics? I didn't find it in school. Okay, that's where it is. And I for me, what is, I don't know, maybe frightening is the wrong word, it's too dramatic, but education's institution right now, we're in this age of disruption where, there's a lot of loss of institutional trust all across the board, government, journalism, education, etc. And that trust, it's like the law of thermodynamics. It's not being lost, it's being redistributed. So trust, which used to move up in terms of vertical, is moving horizontal among all of us. Look at, we're here today. This wouldn't have existed maybe 10, 15 years ago. So there's a more democratized way of how we're sharing information. And once you start to share information, the truth of mathematics, i.e. the book title of Dione Pappas, The Magic of Mathematics, that's where our new vector is going to be. And institutions like education, they may be around for their half century, but their relevance is almost bordering obsolescence by the end of the century.
And speaking to that point too about equity, I think it's important that we realize that those that have the most access to resources are the ones that are benefiting the most from wanting more creative fields. Like there is this false perception that we have to double down on a very regimented, standardized test heavy math or any subject with the students that quote unquote need it most. So those that have the least access to resources. But there's a reason why someone like Elon Musk, for example, sends his 3 kids or 2 kids to a school that is entirely hands-on, that does work like this, that he funded. Like the people that have the most access to resources realize that this rote memorization is not the most important thing. So therefore, it's imperative for those of us that are working with students from all backgrounds that they also have access to the means of the few. And I think that we should also, if you want to address, Sunil, there was a question. You started typing the answer from, I believe it's Leitch. I could be pronouncing that wrong. I'm sorry. About the challenges and success in social justice and mathematics. We've spoken before about, general scenarios, but just to kind of weigh in really quick, something that I find fascinating, someone who has a background in humanities, is not only looking at, for example, voter registration records and analyzing who is waiting in longer lines versus those who aren't, but then tracing that back through history through a mathematical lens. So for example, redlining and analyzing redlining maps and where these things are located, and then tracing that even back to like slave codes or black codes. It's amazing what you can learn from mathematics inside the humanities, whether it be through English, a book, or history, or really anything. It's very, very interesting to me because I just wasn't exposed to that growing up. So as a teacher, I had to learn about those things again. And it's been fascinating to see what can come out of it.
The social justice lens, I mean, it opens up it gets into obviously the heart of equity and, access bias and barriers to success, all the things which are still currently embedded in our institutions. So, when you start talking about social justice and math, you're going to get the reactionary from people, well, math is math, and that's generally coming from, communities which, hold the power. Where why can't we just teach calculus and the quadratic formula and trigonometry and things like that? Which is ironic because trigonometry is, again, founded sort of Indo-Vedic mathematics, but none of the names are ever referenced to trigonometry from those people. But when we get into calculus, of course, there's a name comes up in statistics, which came later on. So social justice is going to be, it's no longer going to be a niche kind of area of topic where 1 or 2 math educators spoke about it strongly. There's some amazing people, Dr. Chris Charles, who I am good friends with. He's one of the strongest advocates for social justice, equity, in terms of all across math education, in the classroom, in publishing companies. He's definitely an advocate for making sure there's representation in terms of who is seen doing mathematics. So we're going to go through some sort of, bumps and bruises because there's going to be pushback from the entrenched community of power. But these are necessary battles to go through if we're going to get to that, humanizing end. It's not going to be an easy road. And, I don't want it to be an easy road. I want it to be fraught with some difficulties and challenges, because that's what doesn't, end us will, cliche, make us stronger.
Yeah. And two, I think that sometimes when we look at things like this, it can feel very overwhelming because we feel like we need to make like an activity every single day that relates to one of these things, and we have to reinvent the wheel. A big part of progressive education and humanizing education is just coming up with topics or things that you think students might be interested in, or you just ask them, and then you figure it out together in the class, as in you have a lot of time for research where students are the ones coming up with the questions and they're the ones coming up with the answers. And the class might not always feel like a math class or like a history class or anything like that. It might just feel like, people talking to one another about things, which means that, yes, the content is going to be covered much slower. It's not going to necessarily have standardized assessment. It's not necessarily going to have a traditional test at the end with just a list of questions, but it'll just be very interesting, and everyone will be moving at different paces. The goal of progressive education and humanizing mathematics is not that the teacher spends 4 or 5 hours after school every day doing some research so that their class is cutting edge or innovative. Instead, it's you literally are, getting rid of that power differential between teacher and student and just having a conversation together about things that matter to you and your community, or things that are just interesting, and then walking that path together. Well,
it wasn't a fluke. The last chapter of our book, Math Recess, I wrote with Dr. Chris Burnell, who's also a good friend of mine, and that friendship comes up early in the book. And that's why the last chapter of our book is called mathematics is for friendship. That's its goal. Because if you look at what friendship means, friendship in terms of other things like you need bond over a good meal or travel stories or music. Well, why can't we have mathematics be a conduit vessel to knowing each other, to form friendships? And the deeper the mathematical exploration, freely, openly, candidly, the deeper the friendships. So there's a whole kind of, we're in this sort of, it's like galaxy formations. We're a lot of swirling gases, and we're going to eventually get to the contraction of these gases to form these solid planets of this sort of new solar system of education. But right now we're in a swirling gas phase, and it's very exciting. It's there's a lot of great discussions happening, and even something like this is all part of going a long way to get us where we need to go.
So I think that kind of builds into our last part here. So I again want to thank you all for joining us and talking about this topic. It makes me very hopeful when a bunch of people show up to talk about, humanizing education, because that if someone who's willing to give up their Sunday morning, having a, pretty deep discussion on math philosophy and humanizing ed, I mean, that's amazing and really cool. And I encourage all of you to connect with each other on social media and talk about these things and ask questions. I know that, one of my greatest joys as a teacher or as just a human being is to help people find connections and talk about these things, and extending my reach beyond my 4 walls. And I'm sure it is for you all as well. I encourage you to check out Sunil's book. Quick book promo there. Math Recess is pretty cool. As well as visit our website at humanrestorationproject.org. And again, if you want to see more stuff like this, our goal is to have at least one special guest in every month for some free PD, because why not? But it helps us kind of extrapolate our costs by visiting our Patreon page, which you can find a link right through humanrestorationproject.org. Sunil, any final thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, final for our session, but of course not final for anything. I'm just looking at some points that I was hoping to make, and there's one which I used in my TED Talk, which is Madame Curie's quote, nothing is to be feared, it's only to be understood. There's a second part of that quote which is never really shared. The first part is great on its own, but It goes on to say is, now is a time for more understanding so that we may fear less. And mathematics shouldn't be feared, and we shouldn't be teaching it as, okay, you should overcome your fear of mathematics. That's like giving into the idea that mathematics is to be feared. So I really want to get into, hopefully, what humanizing means is to, mathematics wasn't to be feared, and really honing in on Madame Curie's quote, which applies to so many things, and definitely applies to where we need to go with math education.